You are live in the CNN Newsroom. I'm Jim Acosta in Washington. We begin this hour with breaking news. Yet another shoot down of a high-altitude object, this one in the skies over northern Canada. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau this afternoon gave NORAD the order to shoot it down, and a U.S. fighter jet successfully just did that. It's not clear if this latest shoot down is related to yesterday's incident off the northeastern coast of Alaska. That was near the Canadian border. Nor is it clear if it's related to the Chinese spy balloon that was shot down last Saturday. CNN's Natasha Bertrand joins us now, along with CNN's Paula Newton. Paula, what do we know about this latest shoot down? Obviously significant enough for the Canadian Prime Minister to tweet about this just in the last hour or so.
Yeah, again, and given the week we've had with these objects, it's obviously pretty predictable that Justin Trudeau would want to be fully transparent about what was going on. I mean, Jim, you and I were talking just a couple of hours ago when NORAD, right, the North American Aerospace Command, observed this high-altitude object, confirming that to us here at CNN. And you and I talked about it. The point was what was going to happen next. Now, given that it was over it was in Canadian airspace, it was up to Justin Trudeau to give the nod to say, yes, okay, it was done in complete coordination with the United States. He then tweeted about it saying, I ordered the takedown of an unidentified object that violated Canadian airspace. He's saying that NORAD shot down the object over Yukon. Canadian and U.S. aircraft have been scrambled. That was a U.S. F-22, and it had downed the object. This next part is significant, Jim. He also tweeted that he spoke with President Biden and that at this point right now, at this hour, Canadian forces are trying to recover and analyze the wreckage from this object. Again, it shows a couple things, Jim. The fact that they were not going to let yet more high-altitude objects fly over both Canadian and U.S. airspace without taking it down when they had the opportunity. And it shows very much the close cooperation and coordination between Canada and the United States, given the fact that this is really menacing in terms of what's going on, in terms of, and again, you pointed out, we don't know this high-altitude object or the other one from a couple days ago, who's responsible for that, individual, commercial, or obviously a country. But the point is, this is menacing. It is probing, and someone is trying to send both the United States and Canada a message. I also want to make clear that Canada's Defense Minister, Anita Anand, has been following the situation closely and also tweeted that she had been in contact with Secretary Austin. In fact, she was in Washington just on Friday, and the discussion really did center around how best to secure the Arctic. Now, Arctic security has been on the agenda, will continue to be on the agenda when President Biden meets with Justin Trudeau, likely sometime in March. But I mean, given what's going on here, Jim, they're going to want to take a look at what the debris is and what clues they could possibly get as to what's going on.
All right, Paula Newton, thank you very much. Natasha Bertrand is also with me. And Natasha, you've been following this all afternoon, and as well as the incident that occurred yesterday over the skies of Alaska. You have new reporting on what occurred yesterday, and I guess it might yield some clues as to what we're dealing with today. The pilots were sort of giving different accounts as to what they were looking at before that object was shot.
Yeah, Jim. I mean, on Thursday night, we were told that these pilots were sent up in F-35 jets to take a look at what this object was hanging out over Alaska, near Alaska, definitely in U.S. territorial airspace. And what we're told is that the pilots gave differing accounts of what they actually saw. Some of them said that the object that is still unidentified interfered with their plane's sensors. Others said that they did not experience that. Still others said that they actually could not identify a propulsion system for this object and did not know how it was actually staying in the air. And still, a U.S. official also telling us yesterday that this object did not appear to have any visible surveillance equipment. So it is very unclear at this point what this thing actually is. Even now, as they continue their recovery effort, they have not released any new information, NORAD, Northcom, the Defense Department, about what they have discovered about this object that essentially was shot down and then landed on ice. And, you know, I think between the Canadian object that we're seeing today and the one that we saw yesterday, and of course the Chinese spy balloon, the question is, are these all happening at the same time or, you know, simultaneously? Because we are just looking for them more, right? I mean, that could be the big question here, whether the U.S. and Canada have essentially increased their radar capabilities and kind of made it so they will not ignore objects like this, or will make it so that they can actually more proactively identify them when they do pop up, because they could pose a threat. I mean, with the Chinese spy balloon, that was something that was capable of intercepting electronic communications and spying over the continental U.S. So we'll have to see whether this is some kind of new capability the U.S. and Canada have developed here, Jim.
All right, very good. Paula Newton, Natasha Bertrand, thank you very much. And I know, Natasha, you're keeping an eye on your phone just in case anything new comes in on the American side. Paula, I know you're doing as well with the Canadian side of things. And joining me now to talk about this further is CNN national security analyst Juliet Kayyem and David Sanger, a CNN political and national security analyst. He's also a White House and national security correspondent for the New York Times. Let's begin with this latest incident. This is just going to keep happening, I suppose, until something puts a stop to it. It's very strange. We were just talking about a Chinese spy balloon a week ago, and things have changed, I would say, dramatically. Juliet, what is going on? We don't even know what these objects are. Isn't that puzzling?
Yes, it is. And I want to just pick up on what Natasha was reporting. I mean, obviously, after the Chinese balloon incident last week, our air surveillance has increased. That goes through NORAD. NORAD is a unique entity. It is its commander reports to both the United States president and the Prime Minister of Canada. So when Trudeau calls this, it is both the Canadian and the U.S. fighter of planes that take off. It happened to be a U.S. plane that brought this down. So our surveillance has increased. Our tolerance for this has lowered. So your risk calculation is going to be different. And now we ask the question: what the heck is going on? Is this testing our systems? Is it people taking advantage of what happened in China? Is it private? Is it government-based? We don't know, and we ought not to speculate at this stage about what it could be. But it's I will say people are rightful to be a little bit to view this as a little bit disconcerting, simply because it is not common to scramble airplanes to shoot down things out of the sky. And now we have 3 in the last 7 days in my memory, I was checking right before I went online, I don't remember a single time that a Canadian Prime Minister sought NORAD to shoot something out of Canadian skies. I think this is unprecedented.
Highly unusual, David Sanger. I mean, what do you make of all this?
Well, a few things. The first possibility is one that Natasha raised before, which is that everybody was spooked by the fact that the earlier balloon incidents, before the one that got shot down a week ago, the earlier Chinese balloon incidents, we believe, were not detected at the time, right? We know there were some over Hawaii, we know there were some over Florida. The ones that happened during the Trump administration, we only really learned about after people went back and looked at the evidence anew. So it's very possible that by turning up the sensitivity here, it's a little bit like changing the sensitivity on a magnetometer you walk through in the airport. You're going to get a lot more alarms, including probably a fair number of false alarms. Things are going to set off the system that didn't before. So that's one possibility. The second possibility is the one that Juliet just described, which is maybe someone is testing us to see just how sensitive our system is. And the decision that's clearly been made by President Biden, by Prime Minister Trudeau, is to err on the side of taking things down and showing a big demonstration of defending territory, even if it turns out that they're fairly harmless.
And Juliet, let me ask you this, because Natasha, just a few moments ago, and she's actually sitting next to me, pinging her sources so she can correct me if I mischaracterize this, that the pilots had very different descriptions of this craft in flight. And I believe, Natasha, correct me if I'm wrong about this, that she described something along the lines of they weren't sure of the propulsion system of the craft in Alaska. That sounds weird.
Yes, so not uncommon, and
Okay.
What you want to remember is their timing is very tight. They have to make the decision: are they going to shoot this thing down before it is over any areas, as what we saw before last week, that could be harmful if you shoot it down. So they have 2 different reporting, the pilots reporting different things, and their ability to sort of to make those make sense may have been limited. So your decision now is we're bringing it down in the safest place possible. The most important thing that they were assessing, honestly, is this thing manned? If this thing is manned, then you have a very different calculation, because if it's an ally, you don't want to shoot it down. If it's an enemy, that's going to be something very different if you do shoot it down. And all the pilots were consistent that it was unmanned. And that is actually, we sometimes forget to talk about that. That is actually probably the first thing that they're worried about.
And David, one of the things we don't know is the country of origin of these latest objects, the one over Alaska and the one over Canada. If they end up being both from China, doesn't that sort of raise some alarm bells that we haven't really been hearing for some time?
Well, it sure could, Jim. Just to pick up on one of Juliet's points here. The Friday shoot down, we don't know what the object was, but we know where it was flying at 40,000 feet. And so there was an instant justification to take it down, to get it out of the pathway of aircraft. That's obviously a big route, polar route to Asia. For this aircraft, they have not said at what height it was moving, but they did say it was at very high altitude. So it's a big difference about whether it was at 40,000 again, or whether it was up at 65,000 where the Chinese balloon was. To your question, yeah, if these turn out to be all Chinese origin or even Russian origin, you're closer to Russian territory up where these were taken, then that could well be somebody testing the system. If it turns out that they're not, or they are of corporate origin, or they really were weather balloons or something that went awry, then, this will turn out to be false alarm. But as Juliet makes a good point, if there's nothing underneath that's likely to be harmed, you have very little cost from shooting it down. The calculation made with the Chinese balloon was quite different, which is by the time we all sort of focused on it, it was already over Montana, and there was concern about what would happen if it hit a populated area.
Yeah, and I think the question moving forward is, what are these objects? And, we certainly just have to get to the bottom of that. I mean, it's just very odd that, something over the skies of Alaska about the size of a small car was taken down, and then one day later, another object taken down over Canada. As you were just saying, David, I mean, if this were not a serious situation, they probably wouldn't be shooting them down. David Singer, Julia Kayyem, thanks so much for the expertise. We appreciate it.
Thank you.